let's talk about India's judicial system. But, forget the complex laws and the legal jargon for just a second. We're going to start with just one number.
Yeah, 4.76 crore. For those of you watching internationally, that's 47.6 million. Just take a second and let that number sink in. What in the world could that possibly be?
Yep, that's it. It's not the country's budget. It's the number of court cases just sitting there, pending, waiting for a verdict across every single court in India. It's a backlog so huge, it really changes what justice even means for millions and millions of people.
Okay, so when you see a number that big, you have to ask, where is this jam-up actually happening? I mean, how does this mountain of cases even break down?
And wow, this chart really tells the story, doesn't it? We hear all the time about the Supreme Court and the high courts. They get all the headlines. But just look at that huge slice of the pie. Nearly 90%, 90, of the entire backlog is stuck right there in the district and subordinate courts. The first place any regular person has to go when they're looking for justice.
And here are the raw numbers. I mean, look, over 92,000 cases at the Supreme Court level. That's a lot. 6.3 million in the high courts, even more. But both of those are just completely dwarfed by the 4.76 crore cases that are just choking the lower courts. That's where the real crisis is, just like we saw on the chart.
It's not just about how many cases there are. It's about how long they've been there. The data shows some of these cases have been sitting in the system for more than 50 years. I mean, can you even imagine that? Filing a case when you're young and you're still waiting for a decision as a grandparent? That's not just a delay. That's literally an entire lifetime spent waiting.
So, you gotta ask, why? How on earth did it get this bad? Let's dig into the core reasons for this massive gridlock.
Well, the sources we looked at point to a few big problems that all kind of feed into each other. First, there's a serious shortage of judges, just not enough people to hear all the cases. Then, you've got these really complex legal procedures that just invite endless delays and adjournments. On top of all that, more and more lawsuits are being filed every year, and the courts often lack basic tech and infrastructure. It's really a perfect storm for delay.
Okay, so with a crisis this big, it brings up a really tough question. Who's actually held accountable for all this? And that takes us right to the idea of judicial accountability.
This slide, man, it tells you everything you need to know in just two numbers. On one side, you have over 8,600 complaints filed against judges in the last decade alone. And on the other side, the number of Supreme Court judges who've actually been removed from their job in the last 75 years. And that number is a big, fat zero. So what's with the huge disconnect?
Well, the answer is in the process itself. It's called impeachment. And to remove a Supreme Court judge, you don't just need a majority vote, you need a 2/3 supermajority, and not just in one House of Parliament, but in both. The bar was set so incredibly high in the Constitution that it's turned out to be almost impossible to actually do.
And that brings us to this one, stark fact. In more than 75 years since India became a republic, not one single sitting Supreme Court judge has ever been successfully impeached. Not one.
All right, let's add one more piece to this puzzle about workload and efficiency, and that's the whole tradition of court vacations.
So how does this work? Well, every summer, for about 6 to 8 weeks, the Supreme Court basically hits the pause button on most of its regular hearings. They have what are called vacation benches, but those are only for cases that are considered super urgent. This isn't something new. It's a practice that's been around for a very, very long time.
And that leads us to the big, unavoidable question here, right? When you have a system that is groaning under the weight of nearly 5 crore pending cases, is taking a long annual vacation really sustainable for the country's highest court? It's a fascinating debate, pitting this old tradition against this just overwhelming modern-day demand for justice.
So, we've looked at the numbers, the reasons why, the traditions, but what does all of this actually mean in the real world? What's the cost for the economy, for society, and maybe most importantly, for you, the individual?
The impact, well, it's just devastating. For businesses, it means contracts can't be enforced, which just stalls the economy. Socially, it means thousands of people who haven't even been convicted of a crime, they're called under-trials, are stuck in prison for years, just waiting for their day in court. But maybe the worst damage of all is how it just chips away at people's trust in the whole idea of justice.
It all boils down to that famous old saying, justice delayed is justice denied. And it's so true. Because when a verdict takes years, or even decades, it almost doesn't matter what the final decision is. The weight, The delay itself becomes the punishment.
And so that leaves us with one final, pretty heavy thought. We've laid out all the evidence from our sources, this incredible backlog, the accountability gap, these old traditions under new pressure. When the system that's supposed to deliver justice is itself on trial, it really makes you wonder, who gets to deliver the final verdict?